Hello, hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Woohoo! I was absent for 2 days and I feel like I've been gone forever. I hope you guys are having a nice day. Today is another chill stream. I thought I'd do a reading stream to get back to the swing of things because I feel like if I just started playing, I might feel disoriented. So a reading stream feels like a good way to come back. About last Sunday's supposed stream, I'll schedule it maybe next weekend, but I'll still see because there was a sudden change of plans yesterday. That's why I had to cancel it on short notice. But yeah, everything is already good to go. I just need to coordinate my schedule with my friends. I hope you guys will be there to watch us when the stream does happen. Hopefully this weekend. But yeah, that's still like being discussed. But for now, we're going to read Charles Dickens' Our Mutual Friend. I don't really know anything about this story. All I know about Charles Dickens is the Christmas Carol story and probably one other story that escapes my mind right now. But I think we can start reading the story. Let me know if I'm lagging or if there's like some weird sound effects. Wait, let me check myself. We gotta avoid scuffs. I want to avoid scuffs. Okay, I think we're good. Let me just get my story ready. Then I'll start reading a story to you guys. I don't know if I can finish this story tonight's stream, but I'll read as much as I can. Let me drink some water before I begin. ASMR. Okay. Mm-hmm. Let me just do this. Hi. Hi. And there we go. Our Mutual Friend, Charles Dickens. Book the First, The Cup and the Lip. Chapter 1, On the Lookout. In these times of ours, though concerning the exact year there is no need to be precise, a boat of dirty, disreputable appearance, with two figures in it floating on the Thames, between Southwark Bridge, which is of iron, and London Bridge, which is of stone, as an autumn evening was closing in. The figure in this boat were those of a strong man with ragged grizzled hair and sun-browned face, a dark girl of 19 or 20, sufficiently like him to be recognizable as his daughter. The girl rowed, pulling a pair of sculls very easily. The man, with the rudder lines slack in his hands, and his hands loose in his waistband, kept an eager lookout. He had no net, hook, or line, and he could not be a fisherman. His boat had no cushion for a seater, no paint, no inscription, no appliance beyond a rusty boat hook and a coil of rope. And he could not be a waterman. His boat was too crazy and too small to take in cargo for delivery. And he could not be a lighterman or river carrier. There was no clue to what he looked for, but he looked for something. With a most intent in searching gaze, the tide which had turned an hour before was running down, and his eyes watched every little race and eddy in its broad sweep. As the boat made slight headway against it, or drove stern foremost before it, according as he directed his daughter by a movement of his head. She watched his face as earnestly as he watched the river, but in the intensity of her look there was a touch of dread or horror. Allied to the bottom of the river, rather than the surface, by reason of the slime and ooze which was covered by its sodded state. The boat and the two figures in it obviously were doing something that they often did, and were seeking what they often sought. Half savage as the man showed, with no covering on his matted head, with his brown arms bare to between the elbow and the shoulder, with the loose knot of a looser kerchief lying low on his bare breast in a wilderness of beard and whisker, with such dress as he wore seeming to be made out of mud that begrimed his boat. Still, there was a businesslike usage in his steady gaze. So with every little action of the girl, with every turn of her wrist, perhaps most of all with her look of horror, they were things of usage. Keep her out, Lizzie. Tide runs strong here. Keep her well afore the sweep of it. Trusting to the girl's skill and making no use of the rudder, he eyed the coming tide with an absorbed attention. So the girl eyed him, but, entrusting to the girl's skill and making no use of the rudder. Oh wait, I read the wrong line again. But it happened now that a slant of light from the setting sun glanced into the bottom of the boat and touched a rotten stain there which bore some resemblance to the outline of a muffled human form, colored it as though with diluted blood. This caught the girl's eye, and she shivered. "What ails you?" said the man, immediately aware of it, though so intent on the advancing waters. I see nothing afloat." The red light was gone, the shudder was gone, and his gaze, which had come back to the boat for a moment, travelled away again. Wheresoever the strong tide met with the impediment, and his gaze, which had come back to the boat for a moment, travelled away again. Wait, I keep reading the wrong lines. Let me read that again. I'm so sorry. What's wrong with my eyes? The red light was gone, the shudder was gone, and his gaze, which had come back to the boat for a moment, travelled away again. Wheresoever the strong tide met with an impediment, his gaze paused for an instant. At every mooring chain and rope, at every stationary boat or barge that split the current into a broad arrowhead, at the offsets from the piers of Southwark Bridge, at the paddles of the river steamboats as they beat the filthy water, and the floating logs of timber lashed together lying off certain wharves. I don't know how to read that word. His shiny eyes darted a hungry look. After a darkening hour or so, suddenly the rudder lines tightened in his hold, and he steered hard towards the Surrey shore. Always watching his face, the girl instantly answered to the action in her sculling. Presently the boat swung around, quivered as a form of sudden jerk, and the upper half of the man was stretched out over the stern. The girl pulled the hood of the cloak she wore over her head and over her face, and looking backward so that the front folds of this hood were turned down the river, kept the boat in the direction going before the tide. Until now the boat had barely held her own, and had hovered between one spot, but now the banks changed swiftly, and the deepening shadows and the kindling lights of London Bridge were past, and the tiers of shipping lay on either hand. It was not until one of the upper half of the man came back into the boat. His arms were wet and dirty, and he washed them over the side. In his right hand he held something, and he washed that in the river too. It was money. He chinked it once, and he blew upon it once, and he spat upon it once, for luck, he hoarsely said, before he put it in his pocket. Lizzie! The girl turned her face towards him with a start, and rode in silence. Her face was very pale. He looked as a hook-nosed man, and with that, and his bright eyes, and his ruffled head, he bore a certain likeness to a roused bird of prey. Take that thing off your face. She put it back. Here, and give me hold of the sculls. I'll take the rest of the spout. No, no, father. No, I can't indeed. Father, I cannot sit so near it. He was moving toward her to change places, but her terrified expostulation, expostulation, but her terrified expostulation stopped him, and he resumed his seat. What hurt can it do you? None, none, but I cannot bear it. It's my belief you hate the sight of the very river. I do not like it, father. As if it wasn't your living, as if it wasn't meat and drink to you. At these latter words, the girl shivered again. For a moment paused in her rowing, seeming to turn deadly faint. It escaped his attention, for he was glancing over the stem at something the boat had in tow. How can you be so thankless to your best friend, Lizzie? The very fire that warmed you when you were a baby was picked out of the river along the coal barges. The very basket you slept in, the tide washed ashore. The very rockers that I put you upon to make a cradle of it, I cut out of a piece of wood that drifted from the ship or another. Lizzie took her right hand from the scull and held it, and touched her lips with it, and for a moment held it out lovingly towards him. Then, without speaking, she resumed her rowing. As another boat of similar appearance, though in rather better trim, came out from a dark place and dropped softly alongside. "In luck again, Gaffer," said a man with his squinting leer, who scowled at her, who was alone. I know you'd was in luck again. By your wake as you come down." "Ah," replied the other, dryly. "So you're out, eh? So you're out, are you?" "Yes, partner." There was now a tender yellow moonlight in the river, and the newcomer, keeping half his boat's length astern of the other boat, looked hard as a track. "I say to myself," he went on, "directly you hove in view, yonder's Gaffer, and in luck again. By George if he ain't. Skull it is, partner. Don't fret yourself. I didn't touch him." This was in answer to a quick impatient movement on the part of Gaffer, the speaker at the same time unshipping his scull on the side and laying his hand on the gunwale of Gaffer's boat and holding on it. "He's had touches enough not to want no more. As well as I make him out, Gaffer. Been a knocking about with a pretty many tides. Ain't he, partner? Such is my out-of-luck ways, you see. He must have passed me when he went up last time, for I was on the lookout below bridge here. I almost think you're like a Waltus, partner, and sent them out." He spoke in a dropped voice, and with more than one glance at Lizzie, he pulled on her hood again. Both men looked with a weird unholy interest in the wake of Gaffer's boat. "Easy does it, Peakpx does." I guess that's how you read it. It's spelled Betwixtus. Well, the US is a different word because it's us. Anyway, let me read that again. "Easy does it, Peakpx. Shall I take him aboard, partner?" "No," said the other, in so surly a tone that the man, after a blank stare, acknowledged it with a retort. "Aren't been eating nothing as has disagreed with you, have you, partner?" "Why, yes, I have," said Gaffer. "I have been swallowing too much of that word, partner. I am no partner of yours." "Since when was you no partner of mine, Gaffer Hexam Esquire?" "Since you was accused of robbing a man, accused of robbing a live man," said Gaffer with great indignation. "And what if I had been accused of robbing a dead man, Gaffer? You couldn't do it. Couldn't you, Gaffer? No. Has a dead man any use for money? Is it possible for a dead man to have money? What world does a dead man belong to?" "T'other world." "What world does money belong to?" "This world." "How can money be a corpse's? Can a corpse own it, want it, spend it, claim it, miss it?" Don't try to go confounding the rights and wrongs of things in that way. But it's worthy of the sneaking spirit that robs a live man. I'll tell you what it is. No, you won't. I'll tell you what it is. You got off with a short time. You got off with a short time of it for putting your hands in the pocket of a sailor, a live sailor. Make the most of it and think yourself lucky. But don't think after to come over me with your partners. We have worked together in the past, but we work together no more in time present nor yet future. Let go, cast off. Gaffer, if you think to get rid of me this way, if I don't get rid of you this way, I'll try another, and chop you over the fingers with the stretcher, or take a pick at your head with a boat hook. Cast off. Pull you, Lizzie. Pull home, since you won't let your father pull. Lizzie shot ahead, and the other boat fell astern. Lizzie's father composing himself into the sea. Lizzie's father composing himself into the easy attitude of one who had ascertained the high moralities and taken an unsaleable position, slowly lighted a pipe and smoked and took a survey of what he had in tow. What he had in tow launched itself at him sometimes in an awful manner when the boat was checked, and sometimes seemed to try to wrench itself away, though for the most part of it followed submissively. A neophyte might have fancied the ripples passing over it were dreadfully like faint changes of expression on a sightless face, but Gaffer was no neophyte and had no fancies. And that was chapter 1. Let me just take another sip of water before we continue to chapter 2. So far, it's been interesting. Water tastes so good. Let me just tie my hair. I took a bath, but I'm already starting to sweat. When will summer end? Anyways, chapter 2. The Man from Somewhere. Mr. and Mrs. Veneering were brand new people in a brand new house in a brand new quarter of London. Everything about the Veneerings was spick and span new. All their furniture was new, all their friends were new, all their servants were new. Their plates was new, their carriage was new, their harness was new, their horses were new, their pictures were new, they themselves were new. They were as newly married as was lawfully compatible with their having a brand new baby, and if they had set up a great-grandfather, he would have become home in matting from Pantechnicon. I don't know how to read this word. Without a scratch upon him, French polished to the crown of his head. For the Veneerings, for in the Veneering establishment, from the hall chairs with the new coat of arms to the grand pianoforte. I feel like I should know how to read that word. With a new action, and upstairs again to their new fire escape, all things were in state of high varnish and polish. And what was observed in the furniture was observable in the Veneerings. The surface smelt a little too much of the workshop, and was a trifle sticky. There was an innocent piece of dinner furniture that went upon easy casters and was kept over a livery stable yard in Duke Street, St. James, when not in use, to whom the veneerings were a source of blind confusion. The name of this article was Twemlow, being first cousin of Lord Snigsworth. He was in frequent requisition, and at many houses might be said to represent the dining table in its normal state. Mr. and Mrs. Veneering, for example, arranging a dinner habitually started with Twemlow, and then put leaves on him and added guests to him. Sometimes the table considered the Twemlow and half a dozen leaves. Sometimes of Twemlow and a dozen leaves. Sometimes Twemlow was pulled out to his utmost extent of 20 leaves. Mr. and Mrs. Veneering on occasion of ceremony faced each other in the center of the board. And thus the parallels still held, for it always happened that the more Twemlow was pulled out, the further he found himself from the center and nearer to the sideboard at one end of the room, or the window curtains of the other. But it was not this which steeped the feeble soul of Twemlow in confusion. This was used to, and could take soundings of, the abyss to which he could not find no bottom, and from which started forth the engrossing and ever-swelling difficulty of his life, was so insoluble question, whether he was Veneering's oldest friend or newest friend. To the excognition of this problem, the harmless gentleman had devoted many anxious hours, both in his lodging over the livery stable yard, and in the cold gloom favourable meditation of St. James Square. Thus Twemlow had first known Veneering at his club, where Veneering then knew nobody but the man who made them known to one another, who seemed to be the most intimate friend he had in the world, and whom he had known 2 days. The bond of union between their souls, the nefarious conduct of the committee respecting the cookery of the fillet of veal, having been accidentally cemented at the date. Immediately upon this, Twemlow received an invitation to dine with Veneering, and dined, the man being of the party. Excuse me. Immediately upon that, Twemlow received an invitation to dine with the man, and dined, Veneering being of the party, and the man's were a member, an engineer, a payer of the nation debt, a poem of Shakespeare, a grievance, and a public office, who all seemed to be utter strangers to Veneering. And yet immediately after that, Twemlow received an invitation to dine at Veneering's, expressly to meet the member, the engineer, the payer of the national debt, the poem of Shakespeare, the grievance, and the public officer, and dining, discovered that all of them were the most intimate friends Veneering had in the world, and that the wives of all of them, who were all there, were the objects of Mrs. Veneering's most devoted affection and tender confidence. Thus it had come about that Mr. Twemlow had said to himself in his lodgings, with his hand on his forehead, "I must not think of this. This is enough to soften any man's brain." And yet there was always thinking of it, and could never form a conclusion. Hello, welcome home. I just started chapter 2. Chapter 1 was the introduction, and we started off at the river, rowing about, trying to look for something, and there was a father and a daughter, Gaffer and Lizzie, and they encountered another boat with another man in tow who used to be Gaffer's partner, but now he does not consider that man a partner no more after he had tried to steal from someone alive. For Gaffer thinks that dead men don't have value for money, so it doesn't matter if you steal from them, but if you steal from someone alive, then that's something else. And at the start of chapter 2, we're introduced to a newlywed couple, the Veneerings, and somehow, I guess his name is Mr. Tremlow. He was often invited by the Veneerings to their dinner party of some sort, along with many other people, like an engineer, a payer of the national debt, a public officer, and their wives, who are then Mrs. Veneering's closest friends. So like they're mutual friends of Mr. Veneering is their mutual friend. But yeah, betrayal. I'm not sure yet if betrayal, but this person, the person that Gaffer was talking to, he already did time in jail and maybe was released a few years ago or recently. Anyway, he doesn't want to be involved with that man anymore. But yeah, we're now at the Veneerings and Mr. Tremlow's thoughts and feelings. Yee! I'm glad you like it. This is from Live 2D. I know, no, not Live 2D. VTube Studios, one of their assets. From an artist. I should check out the artist's name later. But yeah. Let me continue reading. Where was I? Excuse me. Okay. This evening, the Veneerings gave a banquet. 11 leaves in the tremolo, 14 in company, all told. 4 pigeon-breasted retainers in plain clothes stand in line in the hall. A 5th retainer proceeding up the staircase with a mournful air, as who should say, "Here is another wretched creature come to dinner, such is life," announces, "Mr. Tremlow." Mrs. Veneering welcomes her sweet Mr. Tremlow. Mr. Veneering welcomes his dear Mr. welcomes dear Tremlow. I keep wanting to read Mr. Mrs. Veneering does not expect that Mr. Tremlow can in nature care much to such insipid things as babies. But so old friend must please to look at baby. "Ah, you will know the friend of your family better, Tootlums," says Mr. Veneering, nodding emotionally at the new article. When you begin to take notice, he then begs to make his dear Tremlow known to his 2 friends, Mr. Boots and Mr. Brewer. Clearly has no distinct idea which is which. But now a fearful circumstance occurs. "Mr. and Mrs. Podsnap, my dear," says Mr. Veneering to Mrs. Veneering, with an air of much friendly interest, while the door stands open. The Podsnaps, two smiling, large men, with a fatal freshness to him, appearing with his wife, instantly deserts his wife and darts a Tremlow with, "How do you do? So glad to know you. Charming house to have you here." I hope we are not late. So glad of the opportunity, I am sure. When the first shock fell upon him, Tremlow twice skipped back in his neat little shoes and his neat little silk stockings of a bygone fashion, as if impelled to leap over a sofa behind him. But the large man closed with him and proved too strong. "Let me," says the large man, trying to attract the attention of his wife in the distance, "have the pleasure of presenting Mrs. Podsnap to her host. She will be." In his fatal freshness he seemed to find perpetual verdure and eternal youth in the phrase. "She will be so glad of the opportunity, I'm sure." In the meantime, Mrs. Podsnap, unable to originate a mistake on her own account, because Mrs. Veneering is the only other lady there, does her best in the way of handsomely supporting her husband's, by looking towards Mr. Twemlow, with a plaintive countenance, and remarking to Mrs. Veneering in a feeling manner, firstly, that she fears he has been rather bilious of late, and secondly, that the baby is already very like him. It is questionable whether any man quite relishes being mistaken for any other man, but Mr. Veneering, having his very evening set up the shirt front of the young Antinous, tama, a new work cambric, just come home, is not all complimented by supported to be Twemlow, who is dry and weazen, and some 30 years older. Mrs. Veneering equally represents the imputation of being the wife of Twemlow. As to Twemlow, he is so sensible of being a much better bred man than Veneering, that he considers the large man an offensive ass. Did not expect to read that word here. In this complicated dilemma, Mr. Veneering approaches the large man with extended hand and smilingly assures that incorrigible personage that he is delighted to see him, who in his fatal freshness instantly replies, "Thank you, I am ashamed to say that I cannot at this moment recall where we met, but I am so glad of this opportunity, I am sure." Then pouncing upon Twemlow, who holds back with all his feeble might, he is hailing him off to present him, as Veneering to Mrs. Podsnap, when the arrival of more guests unravelled the mistake, whereupon, having reshaken hands with Veneering as Veneering, he shakes hand with Twemlow as Twemlow, and winds it all up to his own perfect satisfaction by saying to the last named ridiculous opportunity, "But so glad of it, I am sure." Now, Twemlow, having undergone this terrific experience, having likewise noted the fusion of boots in brewer and brewer in boots, and having further observed that of the remaining, oh my god, there's like loud motorcycles passing by. Wait, let me read that again. Now Twemlow, having undergone this terrific experience, having likewise noted the fusion of boots in brewer and brewer in boots, and having further observed that of the remaining 7 guests, 4 discreet characters enter with wondering eyes, and wholly decline to commit themselves as to which is Veneering. You can't? Okay, that's good, but it kind of like distracts me when I hear them, so I have to repeat the sentences sometimes. Anyway, until Veneering has them in his grasp. Twemlow, having profited by these studies, finds his brain wholesomely hardening as he approaches the conclusion that he really is Veneering's oldest friend. When his brain softens again and all is lost, though his eyes encountering Veneering at the large man linked together as twin brothers in the back drawing room near the conservatory door, and through his ears informing him, in the tones of Mrs. Veneering, that the same large man is to be baby's godfather. Dinner is on the table. Thus the melancholy retainer, who, as who should say, "Come down and be poisoned, ye unhappy children of men." Twemlow, having no lady assigned to him, goes down in the rear, with his hands to his forehead. Boots and Brewer, thinking him indisposed, whisper, "Man faint, had no lunch." But he is only stunned by the unvanquishable difficulty of his existence. Revived by soup, Twemlow discourses mildly to the court circular with Boots and Brewer, is appealed to at fish stage of the banquet by Veneering on the disputed question whether his cousin, Lord Snigsworth, is in or out of town. Gives it that his cousin is out of town. At Snigsworthy Park? Veneering inquires. At Snigsworthy. Twemlow rejoins. Boots and Brewer regard this as a man to be cultivated, and Veneering is clear that he is a remunerative article. Meantime, the retainer goes round like a gloomy analytical chemist, always seeming to say, after "Chablis, sir? You wouldn't if you knew what it was made of." The great looking glass above the sideboard reflects the table of the company, reflects the new Veneering crests, gold and eke in silver, frosted and also thawed, a camel of all work. The Herald's College found a crusading ancestor for Veneering, who bore a camel on his shield, or might have done it if he had thought of it, and a caravan of camels take charge of the fruits and flowers and candles, and kneel down to be loaded with salt. Reflects Veneering, 40, wavy-haired, dark, tending and corpulence, sly, mysterious, filmy, a kind of sufficiently well-looking veiled prophet, not prophesying. Reflects Mrs. Veneering, fair, aquiline-nosed, and fingered, not so much light hair as she might have, gorgeous in raiment and jewels, enthusiastic, propitiatory, conscious that a corner of her husband's veil is over herself. Reflects Podsnap, prosperously feeding two little light-colored wiry wings, one on either side of his else bald head, looking as if his hairbrushes as his hair dissolving view of red beads on his forehead. Large allowance of crumpled shirt collar, up behind. Reflects Mrs. Podsnap, fine woman, for Professor Owen, quantity of bone, neck, and nostrils, like a rocking horse. Hard features, majestic headdress in and cravat, cheeks drawn in as if he had made a great effort to retire into himself some years ago, and had to go so far and never got any farther. Reflects mature young lady, raven locks, and complexion that lights up well when well powdered, as it is, carrying on considerably in the captivation of mature young gentlemen, with too much nose on its face, too much ginger in his whiskers, and too much torso in his waistcoat, too much sparkle in his studs, his eyes, his buttons, his stock, and his teeth. Reflects charming old Lady Tippins on Veneering's right, with an immense obtuse drab oblong face. Why did I say it like that? Like face in a tablespoon, and a dyed long walk up to the top of her head, as a convenient public approach to the bunch of false hair behind. Pleased to patronize Mrs. Veneering opposite, who is pleased to be patronized. Reflects a certain Mortimer, another of Veneering's oldest friends, who never was in the house before, and appears not to want to come again, who sits on disconsolate on Mrs. Veneering's left, and who was, how do you read this word? Inveigled? It's like Inveiggled. I guess inveigled. Inveigled by Lady Tippins, a friend of his boyhood, to come to these peoples and talk. And who won't talk? Reflects Eugene, a friend of Mortimer, buried alive in the back of his chair, behind a shoulder, with a powder epaulette on looking-glass. Reflects Boots and Brewer, the two whose stuffed buffers interposed between the rest of the company and possible accidents. I guess it took me a while to comprehend what does it mean when it says reflects. I guess like on the table they are facing each other. That's the setup. Like Mr. Veneering, and then Mr. and Mrs. Podsnaps, and then the others. So yeah, that's their table setup. There's too many characters, I kind of forgot which is facing which. Anyway, the Veneering dinners are excellent dinners, or new people wouldn't come, and all goes well. Notably, Lady Tippins has made a series of experiments on her digestive functions. Yeah, the couple, they are sus. They're like a new couple with a new house, with new servants, with new furnitures, with a newborn baby, newlywed, new to town. They're just so new. And then they have people over. And like Mr. Twemlow is not sure if he's the oldest friend that the Veneerings have. So that's his dilemma. And I guess, as it was mentioned, Mortimer is one of their oldest friend, I guess. So maybe Mr. Twemlow, and then Mortimer, and then the rest. Yeah, maybe they're like nouveau rich, or who knows. But I believe the Veneerings are related to Lord Snigsworth. But who knows if Lord Snigsworth is real, because he's out of town. Let's see. Notably, Lady Tippins has made a series of experiments on her digestive functions, so extremely complicated and daring, that if they could be published with their results, it might benefit the human race. Maybe, but yeah, Mortimer. Having taken in provisions from all parts of the world, this hardy old cruiser has last touched at the North Pole. when, as the ice plates are being removed, the following words fall from her. I assure you, my dear Veneering. Poor Twemlow's hands approach his forehead, for it would seem now that Lady Tippins is going to be the oldest friend. Oh, are they fighting to be the one closest to the Veneerings? I assure you, my dear Veneering, that it is the oddest affair. Like the advertising people, I don't ask you to trust me. Without offering a respectable reference, Mortimer there is my reference, and knows all about it. Mortimer raises his dropping eyelids, and slightly opens his mouth, but a faint smile, expressive of "what's the use?" passes over his face, and he drops his eyelids and shuts his mouth. Now, Mortimer, says Lady Tippins, rapping the sticks of her closed green fan upon the knuckles of her left hand, which is particularly rich in knuckles. I insist upon you telling all that is to be told about the man from Jamaica. Give you my honor, I never heard of any man from Jamaica, except the man who was a brother, replies Mortimer. Tobago, then? Not yet from Tobago. Except Eugene strikes in, so unexpectedly that the mature young lady, who has forgotten all about him, with a start takes the epaulet out of his way. Except our friend who long lived on rice pudding and isinglass. I don't know how to read this word. Isinglass. Isinglass? Isinglass? Anyway, till the length to his something or other, his physician said something else, and a leg of mutton somehow ended in dago. Yeah, they want bragging rights. Everyone wants to be close to the new rich people. A reviving impression goes round the table that Eugene is coming out. An unfulfilled impression, for he goes in again. Now, my dear Mrs. Veneering, quoth Lady Tippins, I appeal to you whether this is not the basest conduct ever known in this world? I carry my lovers about, 2 or 3 at a time, on condition that they are very obedient and devoted. And here is my oldest lover-in-chief, the head of all my slaves, throwing off his allegiance before company. And here is another of my lovers, a rough Simon at present certainly, but of whom I had most hopeful expectations, as his turning out well in course of time, pretending he can't remember his nursery rhymes, on purpose to annoy me, for he knows how I dote upon them. Yeah, it's giving Gatsby vibes. Let me drink some water. Where was I? Uh-huh. A grisly little function concerning her lovers is Lady Tippins' point. She is always attending by a lover or two, and she keeps a little list of her lovers, and she is always booking a new lover, or striking out an old lover, or putting a lover in her black list, or promoting a lover to her blue list, or adding up her lovers, or otherwise posting her book. Mrs. Veneering is charmed by the humor, and so is Veneering. Perhaps it is enhanced by a certain yellow plate in Lady Tippins' throat. like a legs of scratching poultry. I banish the false wretch from this moment, and I strike him out of my Cupidon. Excuse me. For my name is Ledger, my dear, this very night. But I am resolved to have the account of the man from somewhere, and I beg you to elicit it for me, my love, to Mrs. Veneering, as I have lost my own influence. Oh, how you perjured man! Oh, you perjured man! To this Mortimer, with a rattle of her fan. We are all very much interested in the man from somewhere, Veneering observes. Then the four buffers, taking heart of grace, all four at once say, deeply interested, quite excited, dramatic, man from nowhere perhaps. And then Mrs. Veneering, for the Lady Tippins winning wiles are contagious, folds her hand in the manner of a supplicating child, turns to her left neighbor and says, tease, pay, man from somewhere. At which of four buffers, again mysteriously moved all four, at once explain, you can't resist. Upon my life, says Mortimer languidly, I find it immensely embarrassing to have the eyes of Europe upon me to this extent, and my only consolation is that you will all of you execrate Lady Tippins in your secret hearts when you find, as you inevitably will, the man from somewhere a bore, sorry to destroy romance by fixing him with a local habitation, but he comes from a place the name of which escapes me, but will suggest itself to everybody elsewhere, where they make the wine. Eugene suggests Day and Martin's. No, not that place, returns the unmoved Mortimer. That's where they make the port. My man comes from the country where they make the Cape wine. But look here, old fellow, it's not all statistical, and it's rather odd. It is always noticeable that the table of the Veneerings that no man troubles himself much about the Veneerings themselves, and that anyone who has anything to tell generally tells it to anybody else in preference. The man, Mortimer goes, addressing Eugene, whose name is Harmon, was only son of a tremendous old rascal who made his money by dust. Red velveteens, Annabel? The gloomy Eugene inquires. The ladder and basket, if you like, by which means, or by others, he grew rich as a dust contractor, and lived in a hollow in a hilly country entirely composed of dust. On his own small estate, the growling old vagabond threw up his own mountain range, like an old volcano. At its geological formation was dust. Coal dust, vegetable dust, bone dust, crockery dust, rough dust, and sifted dust, all manner of dust. A passing remembrance of Mrs. Veneering here induced Mortimer to address his next half dozen of words to her, after which he wanders away again, tries Twemlow and finds he doesn't answer, ultimately takes up with the buffers who receive him enthusiastically. The moral being, I believe that is the right expression, of this exemplary person derived its highest gratification from anathemati- anathematizing his nearest relations and turning them out of doors, having begun, as was natural, by rendering these attentions to the wife of his bosom. He next nearest relations and turning them out of doors. Oh wait, I reread that sentence. Let me try again. By rendering these attentions to the wife of his bosom, he next found himself at leisure to bestow a similar recognition on the claims of his daughter. He chose a husband for her, entirely to his own satisfaction, and not in the least to hers, and proceeded to settle upon her as her marriage portion. I don't know how much dust, but something immense. At this stage of the affair, the poor girl respectfully intimated that she was secretly engaged to that popular character, whom the novelists and versifiers call another, and that such a marriage would make dust of her heart and dust of her life. In short, she would set her up on a very extensive scale in her father's business. Immediately the venerable parent, on a cold winter's night, it is said, anathematized and turned her out. I don't know what that word means. Anathematized. Here, the analytical chemist, who was evidently formed a very low opinion of Mortimer's story, conceded a little claret to the buffers, who, again mysteriously moved all four at once, screw it slowly into themselves with a peculiar twist of enjoyment, as they cry in chorus. Pray go on. The pecuniary resources of another were, as they usually are, of a very limited nature. I believe I am not using too strong an expression when I say that another was hard up. However, he married the young lady, and they lived in a humble dwelling, probably possessing a porch ornamented with honeysuckle and woodbine twining, until she died. I must refer you to the registrar of the district in which the humble dwelling was situated, for the certified cause of death, but early sorrow and anxiety may have had to do with it, though they may not appear in the ruled pages and printed forms. Indisputably, this was the case with another, for he was so caught up by the loss of his young wife that if he outlived her a year, it was much as he did. There is that in the indolent Mortimer, which seemed to hint that if good society might on any account allow itself to be impressible, he, one of good society, might have the weakness to be impressed by what he here relates. It is hidden with great pains, but it is in him. The gloomy Eugene too. It is not without some kindred touch, for when the appalling Lady Tippins declares that if another had survived, he should have gone down at the head of her list of lovers, and also when the mature young lady shrugs her epaulets, and laughs at some private and confidential comment from the mature young gentleman, his gloom deepens to that degree that he trifles quite ferociously with his dessert knife. Mortimer proceeds. We must now return, as novelists say, as well as all wish they wouldn't, to the man from somewhere. Being a boy of 14, cheaply educated at Brussels, when his sister's expulsion befell, It was some little time before he heard of it, probably from herself, for the mother was dead. But that I don't know. Instantly he absconded and came over here. He must have been a boy of spirit and resource. To get here on a stopped allowance of 5 sous a week. But he did it somehow, and he burst in on his father and pleaded his sister's cause. Venerable parent promptly resorts to anathematization and turns him out. Shocked and terrified, boy takes flight, seeks his fortune, gets aboard ship, ultimately turns up on dry land among the Cape wine. Small proprietor, farmer, grower, whatever you like to call it. At this juncture, shuffling his head in the hall, tapping his herd at the dining room door, analytical chemist goes to the door, confers angrily with unseen tapper, appears to become mollified by descrying reason in the tapping, and goes out. So he was discovered only the other day, after having been expatriated about 14 years. A buffer suddenly astounding the other three by detaching himself and assuring individuality, inquires, "How discovered and why?" "Ah, to be sure. Thank you for reminding me. Venerable parent dies." Same buffer, emboldened by success, says, "When?" "The other day, 10 or 12 months ago." The same buffer inquires with smartness, "What of?" But herein perishes a melancholy example, being regarded by the 3 other buffers with a stony stare, and attracting no further attention from any mortal. "Venerable parent," Mortimer repeats, with a passing remembrance that there is a Veneering at the table, and for the first time addressing him, "dies." The gratified Veneering repeats gravely, "dies," and folds his arms and composes his brow to hear it out in a judicial manner, when he finds himself again deserted in a bleak world. "His will is found," said Mortimer, catching Mrs. Podsnap's rocking horse eye. "It is dated very soon after the sun's flight. It leaves the lowest of the range of dust mountains, with some sort of dwelling house at its foot, to an old servant who is sole executor, and all the rest of the property, which is very considerable, to the son. He directs himself to be buried with certain eccentric ceremonies and precautions against his coming to life, with which I need not bore you, and all except," and this ends the story. The analytical chemist returning, everybody looks at him, not because anybody wants to see him, but because of that subtle influence in nature which impels humanity to embrace the slightest opportunity of looking at anything, rather than the person who addresses it. Except that the son's inheriting is made conditional on marrying a girl, who at that date of the will was a child of 4 or 5 years old, and who is now a marriageable young woman. Advertisement and inquiry discovered that the son is a man from somewhere, and that the present moment he is on his way home from there, no doubt, in a state of great astonishment, to succeed a very large fortune, and to take wife. Perhaps Mrs. Podsnap inquires whether the young person is a young person of personal charms. Mortimer is unable to report. Mr. Podsnap inquires, what would become of the very large fortune in the event of the marriage condition is not fulfilled? Mortimer replies that by special testamentary clause, it would then go to the old servant above mentioned, passing over and excluding the son. Also that if the son had not been living, the same old servant would have been the sole residuary legatee. Mrs. Veneering has just succeeded in walking Lady Tippins from a snore, by dexterously shunting a train of plates and dishes at her knuckles across the table, when everybody but Mortimer himself becomes aware that the analytical chemist is, in a ghostly manner, offering him a folded paper. Curiosity detains Mrs. Veneering for a few moments. Mortimer, in spite of all the arts and of the chemist, placidly refreshes himself with a glass of Madeira. I don't know how to read. Remains unconscious of the document, which engrosses the general attention until Lady Tippins, who has a habit of walking totally insensible, having remembered where she is and recovered a perception and surrounding of objects, says, "Falser man than Don Juan. Why don't you take the note from the commendatore?" Upon which the chemist advances it under the nose of Mortimer, who looks round him and says, "What's this?" Analytical chemist bends in whisper. "Who?" says Mortimer. Analytical chemist again bends and whispers. Mortimer stares at him and unfolds the paper. It reads it twice, turns it over to look at the blank outside, reads it a third time. This arrives in an extraordinarily opportune manner, says Mortimer then, looking with an altered face round the table. This is the conclusion of the story of the identical man. Already married? One guesses. Declines to marry? Another guesses. Codicil among the dust? Another guesses. Why no, says Mortimer. Remarkable thing you're all wrong. The story is completer than rather more exciting than I suppose. Man's drowned. Oof! So the son is dead, and so the old servant will inherit the dust fortune. And that was the second chapter. Let me drink water before we continue to the third chapter. Chapter 2 has a lot of words. It was much longer than the first one, I believe. If chapter 3 is as long as the second chapter, that might be the third, this third chapter might be the last one that I read for tonight. But I will continue reading this. We have to finish reading this on the next stream. You never know, maybe the servant did kill, because he might think that he deserves it. After all, he served the family for a very long time. I was also thinking at first, like, what if the son was actually the analytical chemist? That's why he walked out and stuff. But yeah, it wasn't him. Poor lad, though, he drowned. Anyway, third chapter. Another man. Another, by the way, is an actual name for a character, because whenever the word another appears here, it's like with a capital A when they describe, like, another is blah blah blah. So that's the character's name, another. And there's also a place called Somewhere. Literally, the place is called Somewhere. Anyway, chapter 3, Another Man. As the disappearing skirts of the ladies ascended the veneering staircase, Mortimer, following them forth from the dining room, turned into a library of brand new books. Could be anon, yeah. In brand new bindings, liberally gilded, and requested to see the messenger who had brought the paper. He was a boy about 15. Mortimer looked at the boy, and the boy looked at the brand new pilgrims on the wall. Going to Canterbury, in more gold frame than procession, and more carving than country. Whose writing is this? Mine, sir. Who told you to write it? My father, Jesse Hexam. Oh, Hexam! Gaffer's last name is Hexam. They might be brothers. Ooh! Is it he who found the body? Yes, sir. What is your father? The boy hesitated, looked reproachfully at the pilgrims, as if they had involved him in a little difficulty, then said, folding the plait of the right leg of his trousers, "He gets his living along shore. Is it far?" "Which is far?" asked the boy, upon his guard, and again upon the road of Canterbury. "To your father's." "It is a goodish stretch, sir." "I come up in a cab, and the cab's waiting to be paid. We could go back in it before you paid it, if you liked. I went first to your office, according to the direction of the papers found in the pockets, and there I see nobody but a chap of about my age, who sent me on here." There was a curious mixture in the boy of uncompleted savagery and uncompleted civilization. His voice was hoarse and coarse, and his face was coarse, and his stunted figure was coarse. But he was cleaner than other boys of his type, and his writing, though large and round, was good, and he glanced at the backs of the books with an awakened curiosity that went below the binding. No one can read, ever looks at a book, even unopened on a shelf, like one who cannot. Were any means taken, do you know, boy, to ascertain if it was possible to restore life? Mortimer inquired, as he sought for his hat. "You wouldn't ask, sir, if you knew his state. Pharaoh's multitude that were drowned in the Red Sea ain't more beyond restoring to life if Lazarus was only half as far gone. That was the greatest of all the miracles." "Halloa!" cried Mortimer, turning round with his hat upon his head. "You seem to be at home in the Red Sea, my young friend." "Read it with teacher at school," said the boy. "And Lazarus?" "Yes, and him too. But don't you tell my father. We should have no peace in our place. If that got touched upon, it's my sister's contriving." "You seem to have a good sister." "She ain't half bad," said the boy. "But if she knows her letters, it's the most she does. And them I learned her." The gloomy Eugene, with his hands in his pockets, strolled in and assisted at the latter part of the dialogue. When the boy spoke these words slightingly of his sister, he took him roughly enough to the chin, and turned up his face to look at it. "Well, I'm sure, sir," said the boy, resisting. "I hope you'll know me again. Eugene, how do you read this word? Vocshafte? Vocshafte? Vocchsafed. Vocchsafed. Vocshafte. Eugene Vocshafno answered. Let's just pretend it's read as Vocshafte, because I don't know how to read that word. But made the proposal to Mortimer. "I'll go with you if you liked." So they all three went away together in the vehicle that had brought the boy the two friends, once boys together at public school. Inside, smoking cigars, the messenger on the box beside the driver. "Let me see," said Mortimer, as they went along. "I have been Eugene, upon the honorable rolling of solicitors of the High Court of Chancery, and attorneys of the common law, 5 years, and, excuse me, accept gratuitously, taking instructions, on an average once a fortnight, for the will of Lady Tippins, who has nothing to leave. I have no scrap of business but this romantic business." "And I," said Eugene, "have been called 7 years, and have had no business at all, and never shall have any. And if I had, I shouldn't know how to do it." "I am far from being clear as to the last particular," returned Mortimer, with a great composure, "that I have much advantage over you." "I hate," said Eugene, putting his leg up on the opposite seat, "I hate my profession. Shall I incommode you, if I put mine up too?" returned Mortimer. "Thank you, I hate mine." "It was forced upon me," said the gloomy Eugene, "because it was understood that we wanted a barrister in the family. We have got a precious one." "It was forced upon me," said Mortimer, "because it was understood that we wanted a solicitor in the family, and we have got a precious one. There are 4 of us, with our names painted on the door post in right of one black hole called a set of chambers, and Eugene, said Eugene, and each of us has 4th of a clerk, Kasim Baba, in the robber's cave, and Kasim is the only respectable member of the party. I am one by myself." "One," said Mortimer, "high up an awful staircase, commanding a burial ground, and I have whole clerk to myself, and he has nothing to do but look at the burial ground, and what he will turn when he arrive at maturity. I cannot conceive whether in that shabby rook's nest he is always plotting wisdom, or plotting murder, whether he will grow up, after so much solitary brooding, to enlighten his fellow creatures, or to poison them, is the only speck of interest that presents itself to my professional view. Will you give me a light? Thank you." "Then idiots talk," said Eugene, leaning back, folding his arms, smoking with his eyes shut, and speaking slightly through his nose. "Of energy, if there is a word in the dictionary under any letter from A to Z that I abominate, it is energy. It is such a conventional superstition. Such parrot gabble. What a deuce! Am I to rush into the street, collar the first man of wealthy appearance that I meet, shake him, and say, 'Go to law upon the spot, you dog, and retain me, or I'll be the death of you'? Yet that would be energy. Precisely my view of the case, Eugene. But show me a good opportunity. Show me something really worth being energetic about, and I'll show you energy." "And so will I," said Eugene. "And it is likely enough that 10,000 other young men, within the limits of London Post Office town delivery, made the same hopeful remark in the course of the same evening. The wheels rolled on and rolled down by the Monument, and by the Tower, and by the Docks, down by Ratcliffe, and by Rotherhithe, down by where accumulated scum of humanity seemed to be washed from higher grounds, like so much moral sewage, to be pausing until its own weight forced it over the bank and sunk it in the river. In and out among vessels, that seemed to have got ashore, and houses that seemed to have got afloat, among bowsplits staring into windows, and windows staring into ships, and wheels rolled on, until they stopped at a dark corner, river washed and otherwise not washed at all, where the boy alighted and opened the door. "You must walk the rest, sir. It's not many yards." He spoke in a singular number to express exclusion of Eugene. "It is confoundedly out of the way place," said Mortimer, slipping over the stones and refused on the shore, as the boy turned the corner sharp. "My father's. Here's my father's, sir, where the light is." The low building had the look of having once been a mill. There was a rotten wart of wood upon its forehead that seemed to indicate where the sails had been, but the whole was very indistinctively seen in the obscurity of the night. The boy lifted the latch of the door, and they passed at once into a low circular room, where a man stood before a red fire. Looking down on it, a girl sat engaged in needlework. "Oh, so is Jessie Gaffer's real name? The fire was in a rusty brazier, not fitted to the hearth, and the common lamp, shaped like a hyacinth root, smoked and flared in the neck of a stone bottle on the table. There was a wooden bunk on berth in a corner, and in another corner a wooden stair leading above, so clumsy and steep that it was little better than a ladder. 2 or 3 old sculls and oars stood against the walls, and against another part of the wall was a small dresser, making a spare show of commonest articles of crockery and cooking vessels. The roof of the room was not plastered, but was formed of the flooring of room above. This, being very old, knotted, seamed, and beamed, gave a lowering aspect to the chamber, and roof, and walls, and floor, alike abounding in old smears of flour, red lead, or some such stain which had probably acquired in warehousing, and damp, alike had a look of decomposition. "The gentleman, father." The figure at the red fire turned, raised his ruffled head, and looked like a bird of prey. "It is Gaffer. That was his description earlier in the chapter." "You're Mortimer Lightwood, Esquire, are you, sir?" "Mortimer Lightwood is my name. What you found?" said Mortimer, glancing rather shrinkingly toward the bunk. "Is it here?" "Train't not say here, but close by, but it's close by. I do everything reg'lar. I give notice to circumstance to the police, and the police have took possession of it. No time ain't been lost on any hand. The police have put out into print already, and here's what the print says of it." Taking upon the bottle with the lamp in it, he held it near a paper on the wall, with the police heading, "Body found." The two friends read the handbill as it stuck against the wall, and Gaffer read them as he held the light. "Only papers on the unfortunate man, I see," said Lightwood, glancing from the description of what was found to the finder. "Only papers." Here the girl arose with her work in her hand, and went out at the door. "No money?" pursued Mortimer, "but 3 pence in 2 of the skirt pockets. 3 penny pieces," said Gaffer Hexam, in as many sentences. "The trousers pockets empty, and turned inside out. Gaffer Hexam nodded. But that's common. Whether it's the wash of the tide or no, I can't say. Now here, moving the light to another similar placard, his pockets were found empty and turned inside out. And here, moving the light into another, her pocket was found empty and turned inside out. And so was this one, and so was this one's. I can't read, nor I don't want to, for I know 'em by their places on the wall. And this one was a sailor, with 2 anchors and a flag, and GFT on its arm. Look and see if it warn't it. Quite right. This one was the young woman in grey boots, and her linen marked with cross. Look and see if she warn't. Quite right. This is him as had a nasty cut over the eye. This is them 2 young sisters, what tied themselves together with a handkerchief. This is the drunken old chap, in a pair of list slippers and nightcap, what had offered it afterwards come out, to make a hole in the water for a quartern of rum, stood aforehand, and kept to his word for the first and last time in his life. The pretty well papers the room, you see. But I know 'em all. I'm scholar enough. He waved the light over the hole, as if to typify the light of his scholarly intelligence. And then he put it down on the table and stood behind it, intently at his visitors. He had the special peculiarity of some birds of prey, that when he knitted his brow, his ruffled crest stood highest. Let me have a water break. Chotto mate. I just want to keep drinking water. It feels so nice. Anyway. You did not find all these yourself, did you? Asked Eugene. Well, we're having a chill reading stream, so it's okay if you fall asleep. It's nice to fall asleep early to some soothing voice. I hope my voice is soothing enough, even though I stutter and stuff. To which the bird of prey slowly rejoined, "And what might your name be now?" "This is my friend," Mortimer Lightwood interposed. "Mr. Eugene Rayburn." "Mr. Eugene Rayburn, is it? And what might Mr. Eugene Rayburn have asked of me?" "I asked you simply if you found all these yourself. I answer you simply, most of them. Do you suppose there has been much violence and robbery beforehand among these cases?" "I don't suppose at all about," returned Gaffer. "I ain't one of the supposing sort. If you got your living to haul out of the river every—" "Oh, wait. The bodies, their pockets were empty, right? And they're dead. And Gaffer has no problem robbing dead bodies. He doesn't like robbing live people, but dead bodies don't matter. He probably, I think he did in chapter 1. I kind of don't remember, but hey. Where was I? "I don't suppose at all about it," returned Gaffer. "I ain't one of the supposing sort. If you've got your living to haul out of the river every day of your life, You mightn't be much given to supposing. Am I to show you the way?" As he opened the door in pursuance, a nod from Lightwood, an extremely pale and disturbed face appeared at the doorway, the face of a man much agitated. "A body missing?" asked Gaffer Hexam, stopping short. "Or a body found? Which?" "I am lost," replied the man in a hurried and eager manner. "Lost? I I am a stranger, and I don't know the way. I want to find the place where I can see what is described here. Is it possible I may know it?" He was panting, and could hardly speak, but he showed a copy of the newly printed bill that was still wet upon the wall. Perhaps its newness, or perhaps the accuracy of his observation of its general look, guided Gaffer to a ready conclusion. "This gentleman, Mr. Lightwood, is on that business." "Mr. Lightwood?" During a pause, Mortimer and the stranger confronted each other. Neither knew the other. "I think, sir," said Mortimer, breaking the awkward silence with his airy self-possession, "that you did me the honor to mention my name. I repeated it after this man. You said you were a stranger in London, an utter stranger. Are you seeking Mr. Harmon? No? Then I believe I can assure you that you are on a fruitless errand, and will not find what you fear to find. Will you come with us? A little winding through some muddy alleys that might have been deposited by the last ill-savoured tide, brought them to the wicket gate and bright lamp of a police station, where they found the night inspector with a pen and ink and ruler posting up his books in a whitewashed office, as studious as if he were in a monastery on top of a mountain, and no howling fury of drunk woman were banging herself against a cell door in the backyard at his elbow. With the same air of recluse much given to study, he desisted from his books to bestow a distrustful nod of recognition upon Gaffer, plainly importing, "Ah, we all know about you, and you'll overdo it some day," and to inform Mr. Mortimer Lightwood and friends that he would attend them immediately. Then he finished ruling the book he had in hand, and might have been illuminating a missal, he was so calm, in a very neat methodical manner, showing not in the slightest consciousness of the woman who was banging herself with increased violence and shrieking the most terrifically of some other woman's liver or liver. "A bull's-eye," said the night inspector, taking up his keys, which the deferential satellite produced. "Now, gentlemen." With one of his keys opened a cool grot at the end of the yard, and they all went in. They quickly came out again, no one speaking but Eugene, who remarked to Mortimer in a whisper, "Not much worse than Lady Tippins." So they really did. They really did Lady Tippins like that. Hello, welcome back. "It appears to have knocked your friend over, knocked him completely off his legs," Mr. Inspector remarked when he had finished his summing up. "It has given him a bad turn for sure." This was said in a very low voice, and with a searching look, not the first he had cast at a stranger. Mr. Lightwood explained that it was no friend of his. "Indeed," said Mr. Inspector, with an attentive ear. "Where did you pick him up?" Mr. Lightwood explained further. Mr. Inspector had delivered his summing up, and had added these words, with his elbows leaning on the desk, and his fingers and thumb on his right hand, fitting themselves in the fingers and thumb of his left. The Mr. Inspector moved nothing but his eyes, as he now added, raising his voice, "Turned you faint, sir. Seems you are not accustomed to this kind of work." The stranger, who was leaning against the chimney-piece with a drooping head, looked round and answered, "No, it's a horrible sight. You expected to identify, I am told, sir." "Yes. Have you identified?" "No. It's a horrible sight. Oh, a horrible, horrible sight." "Who do you think it might have been, Mr. Inspector? Give us a description, sir. Perhaps we can help you." "No, no," said the stranger. "It would be quite useless. Good night." Mr. Inspector had not moved, and had given no order, but the satellite slipped his back against the wicket, and laid his left arm among the top of it, and with his right hand turned the bull's eye had taken from his chief, in quite a casual manner, towards the stranger. "You missed a friend, you know. You missed a foe, you know. Or you wouldn't have come here, you know. Well then, ain't it reasonable to ask, who was it? Thus, Mr. Inspector, you must excuse my telling you, no class of men can understand better than you. Then families may not choose to publish their disagreements and misfortunes except on the last necessity. I do not dispute that you discharge your duty in asking me the question. You will not dispute my right to withhold the answer. Good night." Again he turned towards the wicket, where the satellite, and his eyes upon his chief, remained a dumb statue. "At least, Mr. Inspector, you will not object to leave me your card, sir." "I should not object, if I had one, but I have not." He reddened and was much confused as he gave the answer. "At least, Mr. Inspector," with no change of voice or manner, "you will not object to write down your name and address?" "Not at all." Mr. Inspector dipped a pen in his inkstand, and deftly laid it on a piece of paper close beside him, and resumed his former attitude. Excuse me. Oh, I'm so burpy again. The stranger stepped up on the desk, and wrote in a rather tremulous hand, Mr. Inspector asking sidelong note of every hair of his head when it was bent down for the purpose. "Mr. Julius Handford, Exchequer, Coffee House, Palace Yard, Westminster." "Staying there, I presume, sir?" "Staying there." "Consequently from the country?" "Eh? Yes, from the country." "Good night, sir." The satellite removed his arm and opened the wicket, and Mr. Julius Handford went out. "Reserve, Mr. Inspector," said Mr. Inspector. "Take care of this piece of paper. Keep him in view without giving offense. Ascertain that he is staying there, and find out anything you can about him." The satellite was gone, and Mr. Inspector, becoming once again the quiet abbot of the monastery, dipped his pen and ink and resumed his books. The two friends who had watched him, more amused by the professional manner than suspicious of Mr. Julius Handford, inquired before taking their departure to whether he believed there was anything that really looked bad here. The abbot replied, with reticence, "Couldn't say. If a murder, anybody might have done it. Burglary or pocket picking wanted. Apprenticeship. Not so murder. We were all of us up to that. Had seen scores of people come to identify, and never saw one person struck in particular way. Might, however, have been stomach and not mind. If so, rum stomach. But to be sure, there were rum everythings. Pity there was not a word of truth in the superstition about bodies bleeding when touched by the hand of the right person. You never got the sign of out of bodies. You got raw enough out of such as her. She was good for all her night now, referring here to the banging demands of the liver. But you got nothing out of bodies if it were ever due. If it were ever so. Being here, nothing more to be done until the inquest was held the next day. The friends went away together. Gaffer Hexam and his son went their separate way, but arriving at the last corner, Gaffer bade his boy go home, while he turned into a red-curtained tavern that stood dropsically bulging over the causeway for a half a pint. The boy lifted the latch he had lifted before, and found his sister again seated before the fire at her work, who raised her head upon his coming in and asking, "Where did you go, Liz?" "I went out in the dark." There was no necessity for that. I was all right enough. One of the gentlemen, the one who didn't speak while I was there, looked hard at me, and I was afraid he might know what my face meant. But there, don't mind me, Charlie. I was in a tremble of another sort. When you owed to father you could write a little. Ah, but I made believe I wrote so badly, as that is was odds if anyone could read it. And when I wrote slowest and smeared it but with my finger most, father was best pleased, as he stood looking over me. The girl put aside her work, and drawing her seat close to his seat by the fire, laid her arm gently on his shoulder. "You'll make the most of your time, Charlie, won't you?" "Won't I? Come! I like that, don't I?" "Charlie, yes, Charlie, yes. You work hard at your learning, I know, and I work a little, Charlie, and plan and contrive a little, wake out of my sleep contriving sometimes. How to get together a shilling now, and a shilling then. That shall make father believe you are beginning to earn a stray living alongshore. You are father's favorite, and can make him believe anything." "I wish I could, Charlie, for if I could make him believe that learning was a good thing, and that we might lead better lives, I should be most content to die. Don't talk stuff about dying, Liz." She placed her hands and another on his shoulder, and laying her rich brown cheek against them as she looked down at the fire, went on thoughtfully. "Of an evening, Charlie, when you are at the school, and father's at 6 jolly fellowship quarters," the boy struck in, with a backward nod of his head towards the public house. "Yes, then as I sit a-looking at a fire, I seem to see in the burning coal, like where that glow is now." "That's gas, that is," said the boy, "coming out a bit of the forest that's been under the mud, that was under the water in the days of Noah's Ark. Look here. When I take a poker, so, and give it a dig—" "Don't disturb it, Charlie, or it'll be in a blaze." "It's that dull glow near it, coming and going, I mean. When I look at it an evening, it comes like pictures to me, Charlie." "Show us a picture," said the boy. "Tell us where to look." "Ah, it wants my eyes, Charlie." "Cut away then. Tell us what your eyes make of it." Excuse me. "Why, there are you and me, Charlie, when you were quite a baby, that never knew a mother." "Don't go saying I never knew a mother," interposed the boy, "for I knew a little sister that was sister and mother both." The girl laughed delightedly, and her eyes filled with pleasant tears. as she put both his arms round her waist and so held her. "There are you and me, Charlie. When father was away at work and locked us out, for fear we should set ourselves fire or fall out of window, sitting on the doorsill, sitting on the doorstep, sitting on the bank of the river, wandering about to get through the time. You are rather heavy to carry, Charlie, and I am often obliged to rest. Sometimes we are sleepy and fall asleep together in a corner. Sometimes we are very hungry. Sometimes we are a little frightened. But what is oftenest hard upon us is the cold. You remember, Charlie?" "I remember," said the boy, pressing her to him twice or thrice, "that I snuggled under a little shoal, and it was warm there. Sometimes it rains, and we crept under a boat, or like of that. Sometimes it's dark, and we get among the gas lights, sitting watching the people as they go along the streets. At last up comes father and takes us home. And home seems such a shelter after out of doors. And father pulls my shoes off and dries my feet up the fire and has me sit by him when he smokes his pipe long after you are abed. And I notice that father's is a large hand, but never heavy one when it touches me. And father's is a rough voice, but never angry one when speaks to me. So I grow up, and little by little, father trusts me, and makes me his companion, and, let him be put out as he may, never once strike me." The listening boy gave a grunt here, as much to say, "But he strikes me, though." "Those are some of the pictures of what is past, Charlie." "Cut away again," said the boy, "and give us a fortune-telling one, a future one." "Well, there I am, continuing with father and holding to father, because father loves me and I love father. I can't so much as read a book, because if I had learned, father would have thought I was deserting him, and I should have lost my influence. I have not the influence I want to have. I cannot stop from dreadful things I try to stop, but I go on the hope and trust that the time will come. In the meanwhile, I know that I am in some things a stay to father, that if I was not faithful to him he would, in revenge like, or in disappointment, or both, go wild and bad." "Give us a touch of the fortune-telling pictures about me." "I was passing on to them, Charlie," said the girl, who had not changed her attitude since she began, and who now mournfully shook her head. The others were leading up. "There you are." "Where am I, Liz?" "Still in the hollow down by the flare." "There seems to be a deuce and all in the hollow down by the flare," said the boy, glancing from her eyes to the brazier, which had a grisly skeleton look on its long thin legs. "There you are, Charlie, working your way, in secret from father, at the school. You get prizes. You go on better and better. You come to be what was it you call it when you told me about it?" "Ha, fortune-telling, not know the name," cried the boy, seeming to be rather relieved by his default on the part of the hollow down by the flare. "Pupil teacher. You come to be a pupil teacher, and you still go on better and better, and you rise to be masterful of learning and respect. But the secret has come to father's knowledge long before, and it has divided you from father and from me." "No, it hasn't." "Yes, it has, Charlie. I see, as plain can be, that your way is not ours, and that even if father could be got to forgive you taking it, which he could never be, That way of yours would be darkened by our way. But I see too, Charlie. Still as plain as can be, Liz? Asked the boy playfully. Ah, still, that this is great work to have you cut away from father's life, and that you made a new and good beginning. So there I am, Charlie, left alone with father, keeping him as straight as I can be, watching for more influence than I have, and hoping that through some fortunate chance, or when he is ill, or when, I don't know what, I, term, I may turn him to wish to do better things. You said you couldn't read a book, Liz. Your library of books is the hollow down by the flare, I think. I should be very glad to be able to read books. I feel my want of learning very much, Charlie. But I should feel it more, if I didn't know it would be a tie between me and father. Hark! Father's tread. It being past midnight. It being now past midnight, the bird of prey went straight to roost. At midday following he reappeared at the 6 Jolly Fellowship Porters, in the character, not new to him, of a witness before coroner's jury. Mr. Mortimer Lightwood, besides sustaining the character of one of the witnesses, doubled the part with that of the eminent solicitor who watched the proceedings on behalf of the representative of the deceased. As was duly recorded in the newspaper, Mr. Inspector watched the proceedings too, and kept his watching closely to himself. Mr. Julius Handford having given his right address, and being reported in solvent circumstances as to his bill, though nothing more was known of him at his hotel, except that his way of life was very retired, had no summons to appear, and was merely present in the shades of Mr. Inspector's mind. The case was made interesting to the public. Mr. Mortimer Lightwood's evidence touching the circumstances under which the deceased Mr. John Harmon had returned to England, exclusive private proprietorship in which circumstances was set up at dinner tables for several days by Veneering, Twemlow, Podsnap, and all the Buffers, who all related them irreconcilably with one another and contradicted themselves. It was also made interesting by the testimony of Joe Patterson, the ship's steward, and one of Mr. Jacob Kibble, a fellow passenger that the deceased Mr. John Harmon did bring over in hand valise, with which he did disembark the sum realized by the forced sale of his little land property, and the sum of exceeded in ready money £700. It was further made interesting by the remarkable experiences of Jessie Hexam in having rescued from the Thames so many dead bodies, and for whose behoof Rapture's admirer subscribing himself a friend of burials, perhaps an undertaker, sent 18 postage stamps and 5 "Now sirs" to the editor of Times. Upon the evidence adduced before them, the jury found that the body of Mr. John Harmon had been discovered afloating in the Thames, in advance of state decay, and much injured, and that the said Mr. John Harmon had come by his death under highly suspicious verdict, a recommendation of the House Office, which Mr. Inspector appeared to think highly sensible, to offer a reward for the solution of the mystery. Within 8 and 40 hours, a reward of £100 was proclaimed together with a free pardon to any person or persons, not the actual perpetrator or perpetrators, and so forth in due form. Excuse me. This proclamation rendered Mr. Inspector additionally studious, and caused him to stand meditating on the river stairs and causeways, and to go lurking about in boats, putting this and that together. But according to success with which you put this and that together, you get a woman and a fish part or a mermaid in combination. Mr. Inspector could turn out nothing better than a mermaid, with no judge and jury would believe him. Thus, the tides on which it had been borne to the knowledge of man, the hormone murder, as it came to be popularly called, went up and down, and ebbed and flowed, now in the town, now in the country, now among the palaces, now among hovels, now among lords and ladies and gentlefolk, now among labourers and hammers and ballast heavers, until at last, after a long interval of slack water, it got out to sea and drifted away. And that was the end of chapter 3. Oh, I'm tired. These chapters are long. They're like short story lengths. Let me check how many chapters this story has. Okay, so there's like 4 books. I don't know if each book is a new story, but each book has about 17 or 16 chapters. There's a lot to read. Hopefully we can finish at least this first book. This has been Charles Dickens, Our Mutual Friend. First 3 chapters. I think I didn't stutter as much as I did in previous streams. And that's a good thing. Hopefully I continue to stutter less. I still, don't know some words because they're either deep words or words that aren't used anymore. But it's been an interesting read. It's been like a very curious plot so far. Like there's Mr. Gaffer and his children, that one guy who got jailed for a while, the Veneerings and their friends, and then Mr. what was his name? James Handford. And then the dead body of Mr. what was his name? Anyway, the son of the dust man. I wonder how the story will unfold. But until then, we shall keep reading next time. Tomorrow, I'm going to play a game again. I'm not quite sure which game though. I'm kind of considering playing that fan-made dating sim of Luxium because it's been released for a while now. I might try that. I actually checked out the demo some time ago, but that was before I started streaming. Anyway, I hope you guys have a nice evening, have a nice day, have a nice afternoon. Take care, ingat, see you tomorrow. Bye-bye. Good night. Mwa 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 choo choo choo. Arigato for today. Otsu otsu. Bye. Mwa 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 choo 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 choo.